For decades, Monsanto had this public image as a scientific innovator, right? A company that was solving the world's biggest problems in agriculture and health. But then, a series of massive lawsuits in the United States basically blew the doors wide open, revealing millions of pages of their own internal documents. And what came out? The Monsanto papers? Well, they tell a completely different story. And that's what we're going to get into.
Okay, let's just jump right in with a quote that really cuts to the heart of this whole thing. This is from an actual internal Monsanto email, and it hints at this pattern we're going to unpack today. A pattern where that line between what's real independent science and what's just corporate strategy gets, well, it gets really, really blurry.
So, to really get what's going on now, we've got to go back, way back. Long before anyone was talking about seeds, Monsanto was a huge chemical company in the 20th century. And its legacy, it's deeply tied to one of the most notorious chemicals from the Vietnam War. And yeah, that chemical was Agent Orange. It was this incredibly powerful defoliant, used to just wipe out the jungle canopy. And Monsanto? They were one of the main government contractors making and shipping it to the US military. But here's the thing, the real story with Agent Orange isn't just what it did, but what was in it. It was contaminated with this stuff called TCDD, a seriously toxic dioxin. The health fallout for veterans and for the Vietnamese people, it was just devastating. And what's really key here, what the documents showed, was the allegation that Monsanto knew about how dangerous this stuff was decades before the war even started. This piece of information became the absolute centerpiece of a huge class action lawsuit from veterans.
Now that lawsuit, it actually never went to a full trial. I mean, we're talking hours before they were going to pick the jury in 1984. 7 chemical companies, with Monsanto paying the biggest portion, settled with the Vietnam veterans. The price tag, $180 million. And of course, they didn't admit any fault. It was a huge case that kind of closed one chapter, but it really set the stage for the next big chemical fight. All right, so that whole history with chemicals brings us right to our next part. And this is the story of Monsanto's biggest moneymaker, and probably its most polarizing product ever. The herbicide Roundup, and its main ingredient, glyphosate. I mean, this one chemical kicked off a massive scientific and legal war that's still going on today.
So the whole debate over whether glyphosate is safe, man, it has been a wild ride. When Roundup first came out in '74, it was marketed as this amazing breakthrough, totally safe and effective. But then, just over 10 years later, the US EPA flags it as a possible carcinogen. Fast forward to 1991, and the EPA does a complete 180, reversing its position. Then boom, 2015 hits, and the World Health Organization's cancer agency, the IARC, drops a bombshell. They classify it as probably carcinogenic to humans. Okay, so you're probably wondering, how can 2 of the most respected scientific bodies on the planet look at the exact same chemical and come up with totally different answers? Well, it all comes down to the question they're trying to answer. See, the IRC looks at hazard. That means, is it possible for this stuff to cause cancer under any circumstances? The EPA, though, they look at risk. So they're asking, what's the likelihood it'll cause cancer under normal everyday use? It's a huge difference, and it's exactly why this fight is still raging.
But this whole fight wasn't just about hazard versus risk. The Monsanto papers uncovered something way more deliberate, a strategy to actually shape the science itself. And that brings us to this practice of ghostwriting. So what is ghostwriting? Well, the internal emails spelled it out pretty clearly. It was simple, really. Monsanto's own employees would do the hard work. They'd write the scientific papers. Then they'd find outside academics who'd basically just edit and sign their names. And just like that, a study paid for and written by the company looks like it's independent academic research. And you better believe this had a huge impact. Take this one really influential review paper from the year 2000. It concluded glyphosate was safe. Well, according to those internal documents, it was a product of this exact ghostwriting process. For years, regulators all over the world used that paper to make their safety decisions. It took until 2023, after the emails leaked, for the journal to finally retract it. We're talking more than 20 years later. And get this, that paper was one of the most cited articles on glyphosate ever. That tells you just how much power it had. So Monsanto's reach wasn't just in the science labs, it was out in the farmers' fields too. Their whole business model basically changed farming forever by mixing their chemical know-how with something new: genetic engineering and intellectual property. And that's where we get Roundup-ready crops. Think about it. Seeds for corn, soy, cotton, all of them genetically engineered so that Roundup wouldn't kill them. This meant farmers could just douse their entire fields with the herbicide, killing all the weeds but leaving the crops standing. It was an absolute game changer. and a ridiculously profitable one, pairing their chemical with their seed.
So here's the genius of the business model, right? They sold these patented seeds, and to get them, farmers had to sign this super strict agreement. And that contract, it banned the one thing farmers have been doing for thousands of years, saving seeds from their harvest to plant the next year. This created this incredible cycle of dependency. Farmers were totally locked in, they had to buy new seeds and the Roundup to go with them every single year. Now, you can imagine, this practice got challenged. It went all the way up to the US Supreme Court. But in 2013, in a landmark case, the court actually sided with Monsanto. They ruled that the company's patent didn't just cover the first bag of seeds you bought, it covered all future generations of that seed too. That decision was a huge deal. It legally cemented Monsanto's control over their tech and over the farmers who depended on it.
So you've got all these different controversies brewing for decades. Agent Orange, the fight over Roundup, the seed patents, and eventually it all came to a head. It led to a massive corporate buyout and a legal mess of epic proportions.
And then, in 2018, the name Monsanto, which, let's be honest, had become a huge lightning rod for controversy, it just vanished from the corporate world. The German pharma giant Bayer bought them out in this massive deal. They absorbed everything, the products, the technology, and as they were about to find out, all of the legal baggage that came with it.
And oh boy, was there baggage. Bayer suddenly found itself holding tens of thousands of lawsuits from people who claimed their cancer, specifically non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, was caused by using Roundup. By 2020, the situation was so bad that Bayer agreed to pay out around $11 billion to settle most of these claims, all while still officially denying that there's any link between Roundup and the disease.
So when you look at the whole story of Monsanto, told through their own internal documents, it really leaves you with a big, important question. It's a perfect example of how tangled up corporate interests, scientific research, and government rules can get. And it really makes you ask, when all of these things intersect, who's actually responsible for the truth? It's a question that really matters because the answer affects the safety of our food, our planet, and all of us.